And then with Facebook, it should be working soon. So Facebook, we're good to go, but we're not live yet. Like I haven't launched yet. YouTube. Okay, now I think we're officially live on YouTube. I'm gonna put
Hey,
yo. Oh, sweet man. Oh, we're live on YouTube, baby. Everyone
All
say
right.
hello.
hello YouTube.
I guess I'll share the chat. Oh yeah, we're live. We are live. Just gonna put this everywhere. I think I'll just tweet this real fast.
Still not on lobsters though.
We're not live on Lobsters yet,
Oh, okay.
but I'm waiting for Jasmine, and then we'll go live in Lobsters. Ah, so stupid. X won't allow me to post to YouTube. That's fine. I'm actually just I don't know. I'm like worried to post it on my personal page. Oh, I might as well. Who cares?
You're afraid we're gonna say something that gets you canceled?
Well, not on Facebook. I'm not that worried because like it's mostly like my friends.
Ah,
Um,
but the church.
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't care if people say bad things about the church as long as I don't say bad things about the church. You know,
Yeah, you work for them now, right?
I will share my faithful opinions. And allow everyone else to have theirs.
All opinions are my personal opinions, not of my employer.
That's right. Oh, I do. I should probably caveat that. Yeah. I do not represent BYU in any way,
We
or
have
the
a
BYU
panel of
psychology
Nephites and
department.
Lamanites here.
I also do not represent the quality of training that BYU psychology department.
I am not associated with any groups that are antagonistic to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I heard that that only counts if you're like polygamist or something. Other than that, I don't
I'll
know.
take a safe bet and distance myself from any group that says Church of Jesus Christ. No, no.
I wonder, can you be Brickertonite and a member? Is that possible?
Ooh, that's a
Yeah.
spicy question right there.
Oh, Baker tonight. Is that
Yeah,
this one? That's a good question. I
that's a
don't
good
know.
question. Well, I know from I don't know. See, I'm not the polygamy expert, right? That's like
That would
Jasmine and
assume
John.
that any group affiliation with
Well,
one of like the
I
splintered
heard like
sects.
all right. So I was at UVU in my like my freshman year at UVU, and we made friends with this girl, and she was really nice. And she was like, "Oh, I love the Book of Mormon. I believe in Joseph Smith. He's a prophet, but I'm not a member of the church." And we're like, "What? How is that possible?" And she did not feel comfortable enough to tell us that like it's because she's a polygamist and is like part of a fundamentalist
Ah,
kind of group. And so we're like, "What's going on?" And so then, anyways, we eventually figured it out, and we're trying to figure out like what's going on. And I think there's reports that like maybe like I don't know, like 5 to 10% of wards were actually like people on the rosters who were polygamists. So they're like on the rolls as members, but they are fundamentalists or something.
Five to
And then
ten
the
mm,
percent
idea
of
was
what?
like I don't know how true this is, right? This again, this is like forever ago, so I have no way to back this up. But what I heard at the time was that the church was worried about people who were attending fundamentalist congregations relying on church welfare and then
Mm,
but yet attending like the fundamentalist groups,
mm.
which is reasonable. I don't know if that's
Are you
actually
talking about when
happening.
the policy was made?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna go
I
live
know.
on Facebook because Jasmine's just taking a hot minute to appear, which is fine. She can show up whenever. I don't want to exclude her either. Hold on. I'm gonna just put in the details. Maps of I here's a good opportunity to show everyone to the tarot. So maybe I'll do that. Maps of meaning live stream.
Yeah, I know. As far as like Temple recommends, a lot of the fundamentalist groups were also trying to infiltrate, in some sense, use the endowment like to get the ordinance right, but then
oh,
still go back to their
interesting.
congregation.
Really?
Yeah, that I think
Ooh.
that's what was happening is because they don't have their own temples for the most part, right? And
Oh,
some
that's
some
interesting.
groups
Yeah.
do.
At that point, you're just. Would you just be saying that the keys exist in the mainline
I
church?
think a
And
lot. I think a lot of the groups do believe that it's
okay,
the main church holds the keys, like the
That,
AUB, whatever they are.
oh, that
I
is
think that
interesting. Yeah.
eventually we're going to.
You know,
well, yeah,
yeah. Right. Well, so they hold the well. I don't know. See, it's a tricky thing because let's say they don't hold the authority, but they still have the financial like foundation to build temples and all that stuff. Whereas the other groups are more disenfranchised and don't have the financial means to build. You know, because
Mhm.
temples are so expensive.
There's different fundamentalist groups out there. Like I think the was it Apostolic United Brethren or whatever.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
UAB.
Yeah, they believe if I'm not mistaken, they believe that it's like there's like two presidents. There's like the president of the church and the president of the priesthood or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
Mm.
It's something like that. I could be getting the specific, but something like that. And they're like, oh, President Nelson's like the president of the church, but he's not of the priesthood. Is their idea? It's something like that.
I think Church History Matters did something like that recently, where that
Oh.
podcast talked about the UAB recently.
Okay, I'm gonna show you Zotero, and then I'm gonna show you. I'll share an opinion that I was discussing with someone about church history. So I'm gonna share my screen. Um, I'm gonna just share the whole window. Gonna disable notifications now.
Nice.
Oh, so meta right now. Okay, check this
Whoa.
The
out.
regress is real.
Yeah, this
Yeah, this
is
is like the
infinite
temple,
regress
huh,
of
bro?
gods. Okay, so this is Zotero. This is a software. It's a reference manager. So here's my personal
It's not showing
library.
up.
Oh, it's not? What's going on?
It's just showing
I
the
think you're
temple.
only
Oh,
sharing.
really? Oh, that's so
Yeah.
lame. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen then.
You either gotta
show
show
up
your
with-
desktop or like show the specific application.
You know,
probably.
I thought it was doing a window. Oh, I people use Windows different. Okay, it's just different jargon for different things. Can you guys see?
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so this is my Zotero. It's a free software you can download, and this is my library. This is every single PDF, book, whatever that have ever downloaded and kept. Um,
Wow.
and so I have like, and this is from like all. So what I do, when I was learning this in my research lab, I was like, this is a fantastic tool where I can keep track of everything. And so I made a tab that's like my BYU classes. So right now I'm taking like these classes here, and everything like. Here's a good example in my restored gospel and psychology class. Here's all the readings from the class, and then what I do is like, um, I can open up the PDF. Over here I have notes, and so here's all my notes from like the reading, and all my annotations. And here's like, I don't know if I have highlights in this one. I should. I can find a different one. So like,
Hello.
Jasmine.
hey, what's up?
There she
Hey,
is.
sorry guys.
Good. Hey, I'm just showing
Yeah.
everyone Zotero, like kind of like the nerdy part, getting that part out of the way.
Okay.
But let me show you one thing. This is such a cool article. Where is it? Um, let's see here. Helped out my unbelief. Blah blah blah. Where is it? What we are? No, not that one. There's a BYU professor named Gant and another guy named Williams, and they wrote this article called "Agency: What Does It Mean to Be Humans." They published this in Frontiers in Psychology, and it's like it's in the 92nd percentile for like all time downloads or something like that. And so they're trying to they literally like it's actually really funny. They literally quote Joseph Smith in the article, trying to like give an account for what human agency is and like for psychology. But
They're not LDS.
they're BYU professors.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and so it's actually interesting. I can't remember where they quote Joseph Smith. It's like in one of these highlights. But anyway, so with Zotero, so I can like highlight stuff. I can put my notes in here. I keep track of all my stuff so that when you're doing research, you just have like access to it all like forever. You know, if you ever need to refer to anything, it's all in Zotero. So we made a Latter-day Lobsters Zotero group, which is over here.
Is this collaborative, meaning you can hook people up into the?
Yeah, so
into
like
the
here's
database?
this is like a public one I made. Latter-day Lobsters. I added the maps of meaning thing here, and you can go in there and you can open up the book, so that way you don't have to go buy it. But you can't keep it. You can just read it and
Yeah.
annotate it. So anyone who wants to join like these live streams, they can follow us here, and we can like if you want, you can just add, everyone in this group can add their notes here, so we can put like. Well, I'll put like live stream notes. and then we can just keep these. What's the date? Today's the 7th.
Does it allow pen markup? Because I literally just bought a tablet and I started like annotating like
I don't
handwritten
know.
notes on PDFs.
That's a good question.
If it can, I'm gonna scribble all over this. You know that.
For sure. Anyway, I'll stop sharing. Hey, Jasmine, glad you made it.
Thank
I
you.
don't know
Thank
who
you.
else, I don't know who else is gonna make it today. But
How many people do we have here?
5 of us?
5?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Is anyone
Oh,
else
and
you
then
invited, Alejandro?
what was that?
Anyone else you invited to this?
Yeah, a few people. Some people reached out to me, like they just DM'd me about this,
Oh,
but I
cool, okay.
haven't heard back. I'm gonna quickly just tag everyone so that they know that we're here. Hey, Corey Bell's here. Looks like Trevor commented. I'm just gonna add everyone. We are starting. Cool. All right. So I guess we'll start talking about maps and meaning. Trevor and Jasmine, you guys were kind of ones who like kind of put this together again. To like
Mostly Jasmine.
mostly Jasmine. Cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I would love to like share kind of like what I learned about maps and meaning because I've read this book. I read the whole thing. It's like I actually have a copy.
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, so here I'll put this into
Pages
perspective.
wise.
Here's like a typical like book, right? Like a 6x9. It's about this thick, right? And maps and meaning is like this much bigger. Like it's another inch like taller and another inch wider, or it's another inch wider, and then it's like it's a thick boy, you know, and the print is like small, so it's like smaller than your normal book. So it's like it's a beast
Yeah.
of a book. And I read this, so I'll tell you kind of like the story of how I read it, and then I'll go into the preface. But I read this book kind of starting. This was in early 2017, and this was like just a few months after my dad had passed away. And in the last live stream, I kind of talked about how kind of I was just so unexpected, it kind of turned my life upside down. But I was trying to definitely heal from that experience, and I was trying to like, for me, it was an interesting situation because I had always been faithful in the church, but then when this experience happened, it was so hurtful. You know, I felt so hurt, and I was so sad. It was tragic, and I felt like oh, I'm at a crossroads now. Like I have every reason to leave right now, and I could justify it to everyone too, right? But then I was like, I don't think I can leave that easily. Like it seems not right, like not intellectually correct to just leave. I need to like dig into this first before I make any decision like that. But I felt really hurt, you know, when my dad passed away, and then at the same time, like I would go to church and people would just say like cliche things and the same old, and it was kind of boring, and it really sucked because I'm like, hey, I'm trying to heal, but no one is saying anything that's like addressing this, and I don't, and it also on the one hand, it's like there's almost nothing you can say. You know, it's like it's kind of a big burden to place on someone, but for sure people go to church and they expect that to happen for them. So I was like, why isn't this happening? And so people would say things and it didn't make sense. You know, it was cliche. It felt kind of empty. And so I said, you know, if I'm struggling, I'm sure there's other people too struggling. So I'm like, I'm gonna start reading stuff, and I'm gonna try to like articulate my faith in such a way that makes sense, that like it's intelligible to people. And if I can do that, then I'm sure it'll help more than just me. So I started reading Maps of Meaning, and this guy like he really kind of like captured what I was going through. So I'll kind of share kind of what I learned so far. So today we're going over the preface to the book, and so the preface is just the introduction. And usually when you read like a preface in a psychology book or a philosophy book, I don't read that much history, to be honest. So it's probably the same in history too. They'll give you kind of like an overview of the book, and then kind of like what motivated them to write the book, and what's kind of like the takeaway they have from having written the book. And so Jordan, he starts with a personal narrative, and he says, yeah, when I was 12, I started going to catechism at my local Protestant church. And he's like, it was boring, and the people were kind of self righteous, and it seems silly. I asked my pastor about evolution and and religion, and he didn't really give me a good answer. And also, he wasn't really interested in giving me a good answer. And so he's like, so from that day on, like he said, I entered the real world and I left religion behind. And and it was so common for people to do that at my age that no one batted an eye. It was just whatever. And then this kid, if you know anything about Jordan Peterson, he's like a bookworm as a kid. He's reading all sorts of books, and he gets exposed to two camps. Like he gets exposed to his conservative community members, and he's like, oh, the conservatives in my town, they're really respectable, accomplished people. But then he's like, but truly I'm like a communist. I'm a liberal at heart, and I'm like down for communism. And this is him as a teenager,
I think he says
and
socialism. Yeah.
and then but then he's like, I'm in the Communist Party. I'm like working for them. It's like, but everyone in the Communist Party bugs the crap out of me. Like I do not admire them like I'm admiring my conservative people, and that's really weird because I think my communist people are more correct. Um, and then, long story short, he tries to become a lawyer. He starts studying economics, and I don't think he says this explicitly, but I think he like flunked out of I don't think he passed like the exams to become a lawyer. I think he flunked that, and so he's kind of bummed that he flunks out of basically his law career. But then, oh hey, Jared, you have an epilepsy over there? Just kidding,
I'll
bro.
be back.
Oh, you're good. And so he's kind of bummed about that, but then he really starts to think about it, and he's like, yeah, but also I don't think the economic the assumptions that economics makes about human nature are explaining human nature. And then he says basically, like, after a while he lost all faith in his economic training, and so I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, Jordan Peterson basically is having like two faith crises. Like the one was religion as a youth, and that was like kind of painless. But then the thing that replaced um, his religious beliefs, it was like the economic beliefs and the political beliefs. All that collapsed too. And then he's like really troubled, and this is must have been in the 80s, or and so the Cold War is brewing, and he's like, I'm deeply concerned about like the Soviet Union and the US like pointing nukes at one another, and I don't understand why this is possible and why no one else is freaking out. But all I know is that like the economic principles that I've learned do not account for why the US and the Soviet Union are about to blow each other up, right? And so he's like, I need a new model. And so then what happens is, so he's not religious, but then he starts to have like dreams about, you know, nuclear holocaust, and he starts to have dreams about like just horrific things, and he's like really concerned, and he eventually switches, like I think he starts going to grad school for psychology. He kind of like knew enough to make that transition. Um, but then he's like, yeah, this is all happening, and I'm just working like normal. But in the background, I'm like really depressed, and I'm like having these nightmares, and I don't know what to do. Um, and so then I think during this whole time he's writing this book. This book took him like decades to write, and he rewrote it like 30 times. So he's in the process, like from the time he's in grad school to like this was published in 1990, I think, or 1999. He's writing this book, and he he's such an arrogant guy. Like his little like quote at the beginning of the book is Luke. I'm gonna read this here. It's Luke I mean, Jordan Peterson has to have an ego to like do any of this. Like, let's just be honest. It's Matthew 13:35. He says, "I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world."
Oh, is that what Jordan Peterson is saying?
Yeah,
he's
so that's
doing?
like the first thing you read in the book, right? Like that's the first thing you read, and you're like, okay, okay, Jordan. So, so he's really confident about this work. But then the first part I think is really important. This kind of captures everything in a nutshell. He says, "Something we cannot see protects us from something we do not understand. The thing we cannot see is culture in its intrapsychic and internal manifestation. The thing we do not understand is the chaos that gave rise to culture. If the structure of culture is disrupted, unwittingly chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return." So, so in a nutshell, he's kind of giving us the point of the book, right? Again, he's trying to understand why the U.S. and the Soviet Union are about to bomb each other with nuclear weapons, and his conclusion is something like, there's something that's like kind of keeping us in order and in check, and if that's threatened, we'll do almost anything to stop that, including blowing each other up. And so that if you skip to the end of the preface, I know this is kind of like, I don't want to bore everyone, so I'm trying to kind of like fly through it.
I don't think it's boring.
I'm gonna go to my Zotero, and I have it in my notes here. So at the end, he says, this is kind of the takeaway. He says, "I discovered that beliefs make the world in a very real way, that beliefs are the world in more than metaphysical sense. This discovery has not turned me into a moral relativist. However, quite the contrary, I have become convinced that the world that is belief..." Oh, this is interesting. It's world that is belief. That's hyphenated. "I have become convinced that the world that is belief..." That's like Heidegger right there. Like he's trying to emulate Heidegger. "The world that is belief is orderly, that there are universal moral absolutes. I believe that individuals and societies who flout these absolutes in ignorance or in willful opposition are doomed to misery and eventual dissolution." And then he says,
Sounds like the Book of Mormon.
Kinda, yeah. He says, "I learned why people wage war, why the desire to maintain, protect, and expand the domain of beliefs motivates even the most incomprehensible acts of group fostered oppression and cruelty, and what might be done to ameliorate this tendency despite its universality." So, again, he's kind of like introducing the reader to his conclusion. It's like there's something about the beliefs that we have, and there's something about human nature that makes us want to defend those beliefs, and to go to extremes to defend those beliefs. Even to the point where we're waging war, and again, nuclear war to defend these beliefs. So he's saying it's such a, I think, in my opinion, it's a very deep idea. Like, the world isn't just the world of material, but it's also the world of the beliefs that you have make the world. And so when that's threatened, the knives come out, right? And it can get ugly. What was I gonna say?
That's fascinating about human nature.
Yeah.
Humans in groups.
Yeah, totally. So, anyways, so I guess disclaimer is I'm reading this because of this live stream. I'm reading this again. It's been years since I've read it the first time, and I'm now like drawing towards the end of my BYU undergraduate experience. So I'm now rereading this with all the training that I've accumulated over the past 3 years, and so this book is like speaking to me a little differently now than it did. But I think Peterson. But even then, at the time, I was like, oh, this is like a heavy hitter. This is gonna be a good book. And so that's kind of like the preface, introducing you to these ideas, like, I remember what I was gonna say. The subtitle of the book is, so the full title is Maps of Meaning, the Architecture of Belief. And so this book is about belief. This includes religious beliefs, and Peterson will eventually kind of expand that into like political and ideological beliefs. and the map of meaning is like the structure of how our beliefs are structured, and how we interpret the world and how we act in the world according to this map that we've constructed. And this map is just like the beliefs that we have. So amazing book. If you have the patience and like you're into grueling academic reading, this book it's dense, but it's rewarding. And so I read this book, and this was early 2017, and then after that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read the Book of Mormon now. And then the Book of Mormon, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read it through the lens of the Peterson book. And right, the first thing that happens is like the right, like first Nephi, he's using rhetoric to convince the reader that he is the rightful king of the Nephites,
Yeah.
and that Laman and Lemuel do not have a right to the throne. And then that sets up the entire conflict for the rest of the book, right? Throughout the rest of the book, these two nations are at war, right? They're waging war because they believe that one of them has slighted the other. And who does power belong to, right? Who
The
has
whole Book of Mormon is just super subversive. It's like
Oh,
the New
yeah.
World is like here, Lamanites above Nephites. Like, what are the racial, implications there? I mean, how he's trading in bronze or brass for the gold plates. Like,
Yeah.
the whole thing's subversive.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it is very subversive. It's so great, actually. I think I remember Don talking about that on Word Radio, just like how the Book of Mormon just has these little surprises just right at the get-go. It's awesome,
Yeah.
including things like
Yeah, Don understands subversiveness.
yeah, and even things like after Laban is killed, it pivots to talking about Sariah and women. It's like, to an ancient audience, that would be one of the most subversive things to do. To be like, you just killed the guy, now you're talking about women. What's going on here?
Yeah, the last pages had a lot of women related things too, and so those are lost. But that's what I was thinking when I was looking at this maps of meaning, and there's a lot of like femininity, but it's all in that like non. It's really abstract. So that's kind of like how women like being like women are in Mormonism and like female deities. It like almost maps on perfectly to maps of meaning, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I thought the Book of Mormon, Book of Mormon and Book of Mormon symbolism, especially things like the Tree of Life, like really mapped on well to Peterson's ideas. Yeah, and I was like so surprised that had happened. It was like, wow, because one of the things that people kind of complain about in regards to Jordan is they're like, we've asked Jordan Peterson to read the Book of Mormon, he's never gonna read it, that bugs us, he should read it. And it's like, yes, I know Mormons would say that, like why they would say that, but then what happens is, this is my opinion, right? I think it's okay and actually good that Jordan Peterson does not read the Book of Mormon, because what happens is, if all your scholars are Mormon, then it sort of becomes circular. Like, oh, well, they're all Mormon, so of course they're all gonna like defend the Book of Mormon. But if you have an outsider who reaches the same conclusions as the Book of Mormon, then that's way strong evidence, because they don't have a dog in the fight, And so you have a convergence of evidence. It's like the Book of Mormon says this, and non-Mormon sources also point at the same thing. So I think you can make a strong inference that this is actually a thing, and not just like an internal Mormon thing, So
That's rad. That's rad.
yeah, so I have no problem if Jordan doesn't read the Book of Mormon. I'm sure I don't think he's ever even cracked it open. He told me, because I gave him a Book of Mormon in 2018. I gave him Book of Mormon, and I was such a lame. I wasn't that lame, but I was like in missionary mode, because I only had a few seconds with him at the like the VIP thing, and I was like, I have 5 minutes to like give him the Book of Mormon. I need to give him like a missionary lesson. I was like in missionary mode. I was like, I have 5 minutes to get him to take this book. So I like cut to the chase. I gave him the book, and he's like, "Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have a stack of these on my desk back home."
It's pretty awesome. I've never cracked open. That's funny. And in my
Yeah,
family.
exactly.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
Alejandro, I wanted to follow up on what you were saying at the
Yeah.
beginning that kind of led you into reading the book. Is
Yeah.
you said it was basically your dad's passing, and I think I've told you too. My dad passed away around the same time too, so
Oh, oh.
that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Um, what I guess what did you take from that book that helped make more meaningful sense to you about your dad's passing, and maybe how does that relate to the gospel, the Book of Mormon, you know, in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think what it really did for me is it helped me kind of like talk about my faith in a way that was intelligible. That
Mm,
wasn't just like cliche. I was like really trying to think about like what it means for something to be meaningful and what it means to live a meaningful life. And one of the things that he talks about and that he talks about in like his online lectures and stuff, he'll say like, life is full of suffering, and so the antidote to that is to live a meaningful life. That makes the suffering worth it. And so it's like, yeah, like that. Um, I felt that like, and I won't go into detail, but I had spiritual experiences that basically told me like everything was gonna be okay, and I didn't know how it was gonna be okay, but I had a confidence that it would be okay, and I wasn't sure how. But then, as I read this book and I listened to Jordan, the message of me leading a meaningful life is what makes life worth living, and it makes life worth living despite the suffering. That is what really resonated with me, and I was like, yeah, like
mm,
that's the next step. I'll be sad now, and but it'll be okay, and then I can from this point forward I'll build a meaningful life that will make this all worthwhile. So that's kind of like that really motivated me to like really get my stuff together, and so I thought that was great.
that's cool. Is there any like key
That's amazing.
principles or ideas that you drew from it that you're like, oh, this right here, this gives me more meaning? You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah. So one of the ways, he kind of like gets into this a few hundred pages into the book, and he talks about Jesus, he talks about the Buddha, and he talks about not Tiamat, but I can't remember
Marduk,
who the Mesopotamian hero was. Not Gilgamesh, but one of those
Marduk, or I
guys.
don't know, maybe that's
Oh,
another.
maybe it was Tiamat. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
And Marduk, I think, is the dragon. I don't know. Maybe so. He talks about these great heroes in mythology, and he talks about one of the takeaways he takes away from it was like um, Jesus. I think is the most relatable example. Is like Jesus is both a master of his tradition. He's a rabbi, and he like knows, he's deeply intimately familiar with his tradition, but then also he has one foot in order, is kind of how Jordan interprets it, but then he has another foot in chaos, where he's sort of like challenging his religious tradition, and he's critiquing his religious tradition, and he's asking his followers to go a step beyond what they're comfortable with.
Mm,
And he said the archetypal hero is one that kind of has his foot in order in what's known, and another foot that it's in the unknown. And so I resonated with that because it's like I was 23 when my dad passed away, so I was an adult, and so I knew and I had come home from my mission, so I had felt like I knew kind of what I was doing, but the passing of my dad was like totally unknown, right? And death itself is an unknown. And so how do you deal with the unknown when you're confronted with it? And so the book was like trying to get at that, right? The book was trying to argue like doing that very thing, confronting the unknown willingly or trying to um, leave room for what's unknown will help you prevent some of these issues that he was addressing, with like the dogmatism and the fundamentalism and the relativism and all that stuff. So for me, that like really really resonated again, and I see again, it's kind of the same thing happening with like the story of Lehi and his dream. Um, Lehi's in this like chaotic, unmoored landscape, but there's an iron rod that's like keeping him there, and so I feel like those
mm,
ideas were being represented in image and in dream. And oh yeah, that was the other thing too that opened up for me is like Jordan he tries to get you away from thinking so abstractly in terms of propositions, and he's like, no, there's information in images and in symbols that we're discounting because we're so used to just like reducing things to math or reducing things to logical propositions. But the narratives and the stories and the images and the icons and all that, the plays, the literature, all that stuff has encoded information that we're ignoring at our peril or something like that. So
Alejandro, I have a question for
yeah,
you,
yeah.
but also like this is like to the group because I
Oh,
never thought about this until Jasmine kind of started bringing it up about the divine feminine, and as I was hearing it, like what I heard, I'm not saying Trevor's personality is like this specifically, but the question that Trevor posed about like, is there a specific thing that stood out? I feel like it's an example of like a very targeted. I think masculine might be the term, but I don't want to label it as masculine, but just very much like a Western 21st century modernist, like what's the takeaway, right? And I think what Jordan Peterson does, going back to what Jasmine was saying about subversion, is that you know there is a point, but you kind of miss the point if you're not going with the journey. And I think that's what Maps of Meaning is so interesting. It's because it takes something that is essentially a like an experiential experience of engaging with art, engaging with religion, engaging in the world of feelings and beliefs, and articulating them in a way that kind of advocates to the modern person, but especially, and I think this is why he resonates a lot with males, especially to the modern man, because I think there's something very difficult, and I know I noticed this with myself as kind of like a more heady intellectual guy. Feelings are hard. Beliefs are hard. The experience of going through something, right? That feeling that comes up when you get defensive, it's a very scary shadow. And so I feel what Jordan Peterson does is he articulates and kind of provides a safety net, a sort of guide into the world of feelings that kind of guides the modern intellectual person who's scared of feelings to actually engage with feelings and be like, okay, you know, it's not so scary out here. There is value out here. In a weird sense, it almost feels like this also is a way to help guys engage with the real world and women generally. Like I ironically enough, I feel like Jordan Peterson helping me understand the value of symbolism and engaging with feelings and stuff like that also helps me in my relationship too. And I don't know if you feel that way as well. Like I really appreciate Javin bringing up subversion and femininity as two key words because it kind of gave me a huge insight as to what Jordan Peterson does uniquely. And if you think about like the temple, like my wife and I were just recently talking about this, Adam is very like direct. He's like, I'm not gonna take the fruit because God says no. You know, it's Eve. Eve is the one that has a lot more like feeling and like vision and stuff that's unspoken. So I'm really wondering if there's like a connection to like what Jordan Peterson does to like make it so that intellectual men and women have a little bit more comfortableness with feelings.
So yeah.
Can I interject real quickly?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand exactly what this is.
What
Because
is
I feel like there's a lot of like chaos and like different directions. Like, is this like a group conversation about the introduction, or is it just about anywhere that happens to go? Like, what is this?
I was gonna focus on the intro, but I got through that, so we can really open it up. It's all good.
Okay, yeah. So I didn't know because there's a lot that's packed into the intro itself too. So you gave us a summary, but there's so much that's actually there. I didn't know if we were going to discuss principles in it, or was it
Sure.
just a springboard to do like whatever?
Yeah. No, yeah, totally. Go. Feel free to take us somewhere. We'll go there.
I mean, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I didn't know if there was like an actual topic that we're trying to like dive down in and grasp more fully, if it was just more like kind of shooting the breeze, like just trying to understand what the conversation really is.
Maps of meaning, right? Just in general.
Yeah, I think maps of meaning. I mean, I maps of meaning in general, and then I figured we'd start with the preface, just because that's like the thing that's probably the most accessible part of the book. Yeah.
I really like what Jared said about intellectuals and feelings. It's a really good question. How do you guys navigate that? I mean, so Alejandro, it seems like for you, like there was, like your father passed, rest in power and peace, and I guess my mom knew your dad, and well, both your parents, yeah,
Oh wow, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, um, but and so you basically seem to find a way, through the suffering by making meaning. Um, and so that was how maybe, because when I think of suffering, I think of like emotions that are deregulated. They're not, they don't have purpose. They're just like they're too deregulated, to actually, like, I don't know. So it seems like you found being an intellectual was like helping you with suffering. Is that right? Or,
Yeah, that's a good question. So like obviously I was feeling like a lot of emotions with the passing of my dad, and like
Mhm.
before college, in high school I was I was in music, and so like some of the first scholarships I had was in music, and so music is like one of the most emotional art forms. You really
Yeah.
feel the music, and I would play. So like even as a young kid, I was emotional, and man, like I think about in fifth grade, I was bullied by other kids, and I would cry, and I was like, I don't know how old you are in fifth grade, like 9 or 10 or something.
Yeah.
But I would cry, I would like bawl when I would like a kid would bully me, I'd fight him, and then I would feel so bad about it, not like guilty, but like just I don't know, I would just be emotional, I'd cry. And then then again with my whole family and stuff, there's a lot of emotions and stuff. The intellectualism for me is a tool to make things intelligible and meaningful. So um I like intellectual conversations and philosophy and psychology and stuff, and I read a lot of stuff, but one of the problems is like even when people talk about in church, there's that one person in church who tries to make like a deep doctrine talk or something, right? They try to go into the weeds. But the problem is, I feel like it's not meaningful in a deep sense where it's like, where it's relevant, where it's like has it's deeper than just like sounding good. Does it capture the human experience? Um, does it inspire you to be a good person? Does it, and then so it's like, yeah, it's like, does it sound good? That's super kind of like the surface level. Is it relevant? Does it help you like understand human nature? Does it aspire you to be better? And then of course, does it harmonize with all the facts, right? And like, if you can nail all that down, and you've given like a really meaningful uh, idea out there, right? So the intellectualism, yeah, I love school, I love knowledge and reading and philosophy, but my hope is that it's not just for being I hope I'm not smart for being smart's sake. I hope it's like
Mhm.
I can help people make sense of it all. Like a good example is like if you read a sentence in a book, right, like all the words fit together in such a way that it has a meaning. And so we should be doing that with like our lives and with our the way that we present ideas. Like it should fit together so that it's meaningful to people, and people are like, yeah, I understand, I have an insight. Because I believe, especially this is all tying back to again like the idea of having a crisis in faith, that I think it also shows up in the book. It's like before you can determine that something is true, it has to make sense first. Like
Mhm.
if I say something in Portuguese and I said, "Is that true?" You would say, "Well, I don't know what you said in Portuguese. I would have to understand what you said first, and then I can determine whether or not it's true or false." And so, making meaning is, I think, it's like underneath first. It's primary first, and then you can determine if the church is true or not. Right? It's like can you actually like understand what the church is actually putting forth, and then from there you can make an honest good decision about whether or not it's true or false. And so some
Yeah.
people have left the church, and I respect them because I feel like they
Yeah.
have wrestled with
Yeah.
what the church is doing. And some people, I'm sad, but I understand and I respect their decision. And some people do this and they come back, and it's great. I'm
Yeah.
so happy. But yeah, anyway, so long story short, the intellectualism really is about, it's a tool to make meaning, um, first and foremost, and then, if I'm smart, people think I'm smart, great. That's just a cherry on top. But mostly, I'm concerned about making things meaningful for people. So
Alejandro, you brought up an interesting point about people like leaving the church because there was I remember some quote somewhere about like people aren't going to listen to you if they're hungry, right? Like if people don't have their basic needs met, they cannot even like begin to engage in a higher level conversation about like changing beliefs, right? And so like hunger is definitely one of them. But then like you go above and then there's like love and belonging and security and safety. It makes me wonder like how often like people probably struggle to engage intellectually with the church or like re-examine their values or engage with the difficulties because of things like, like offense or like feeling distant and stuff like that, right? Like and of course like in general conference it says like you're in control of your emotions, don't let getting offended get in the way of your testimony and stuff like that. But like on a very like visceral level, if you're struggling with that, it really clouds the mind. Like what Jasmine said, like emotional dysregulation is something I've been unfortunately becoming an expert in over the past like, few years. And oh my gosh, I can be this crazy intellectual guy, AI engineer up the wazoo. As soon as I get triggered, I'm dumb as rocks. And so it's I need to take a step back and remember like a lot of people probably do feel dysregulated in church, and then it becomes really difficult to engage in that like ability to self-reflect and engage on the doctrinal level.
Yeah. And a lot of people think like the offense is like something petty, and that's a way of like gaslighting and invalidating people. Usually the offense is something like, I don't know, asking someone to be like celibate their whole lives or like poverty. Usually it's not petty things. And so to have a more real conversation is really refreshing. Like, how do we make meaning out of that suffering?
totally. So speaking of gaslighting, psychology is like one of the biggest gaslighting fields in academia because, and what I mean by that is like like people usually go into psychology because they want to help people, they want to understand people's emotions and stuff like that, and that's great. But then you get down to like the scientific psychology, and it's all like neurochemicals, mechanistic things, deterministic, assumptions, and so one of the problems with psychology is it kind of like like it erases the human subject at the get-go of studying psychology, and you're like, oh, and you're left with like, are we really just like anxious meat bags, and things like that. But Jordan, again, he also addresses this in the preface. He says, I think it's like the first thing he says, one of the first few things he says, but he says, he says the way I understand the world now is that it's a forum for action, and that includes things like motivation and emotion and the human experience. But then like, so the world is made of it's like a place of things, and it's a place where you can act, and the place of things is where we like understand things objectively, right, as objects, and they're objects that have certain properties. But then the world as a forum for action is where like people's emotions and values and histories and all of these things come into play, and
tagging Swedenborg.
Yeah.
Because so many other people have talked about this, but like this is a conversation that's happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But at least with the Swedenborg thing, he would call it like love and wisdom, male and female. The union of the two create the existence of reality. And so it's like the heart and mind come together. Your feelings need to be articulated and communicated through the mind. And so like I think Jordan Peterson's actually pointing to a reality there, where it's like it's the combination of the experience, the love, the feelings, the drive, the humanity, intellectualized and formulated into action. And then it's just a cyclical dance between the two forever and ever, creating life.
I learned the crazy thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting is as I read him, I think he gives homage to like the world of objects, the world, that typical materialist world. But I think he's doing that at one side of his mouth, while I think his deeper metaphysical actual belief is that the world of actions is the real world. Like,
Mhm.
I've heard, what is the quote he'll sometimes say in a lot of interviews? Something like, what what is matter? And he'll say, I think it's a little bit
Oh,
better.
it's
Like,
the
it's
world
what
isn't made.
matters.
Yeah, the world isn't made of matter. It's made of what matters,
Yeah,
which
well,
I think is
he
really cool.
actually says that matter is what matters. Like, he defines matter as that.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah.
so I think it's going a little bit further, and I think some people don't recognize and pick up on this, that he wants to hold one hand in the materialism world so that he doesn't get thrown out. But I think his actual metaphysical belief is that the world of action, or this world of belief, is fundamental reality. Like,
Hmm.
and I've heard him talk, with this different guests. It's kind of goes back into idealism a little bit. But when you go down and you try to find out what material is made of, and he starts asking these metaphysical questions, he says that at the bottom of it, it seems to be process. Like, process is fundamental, not things. And again, if process is fundamental, action is fundamental. And so I think he literally believes that the metaphysical structure of the universe is built on this process or action, and objects come out of that, as opposed to the reverse materialist thinking.
And that seems like birth.
Wow.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. So I'm taking a class right now on Heidegger. And Trevor, you posted something a while back in Lobsters about like what is it that makes us humans, and you're kind of trying to address that. But Heidegger, that's like his whole bag. Like that's his whole thing. Like what is it about? What does it mean to be a human being, and to be in the world as a human being? And one of the critiques he makes of like philosophy in general is like, even starting way back in the Greeks, philosophy took a turn where they wanted to understand reality in terms of like kind of like things like their objective essence, and the problem with that is that instantly excluded the subject, like the subjectivity of it all. So you're already like you're trying to address this problem with one arm tied behind your back, and you're doing a bad job. And so Heidegger sort of says the type of being that human beings are is not the same type of being that like an object is. Like we're fundamentally different than objects, and the way that we are in the world, we have to understand that from that starting point that we're fundamentally different than just the objects that we encounter. So, and oh man, that book is so hard. It's like stupidly hard to read. Um, but he intentionally wrote it difficultly because he's trying to get you out of your normal way of thinking. Like
Like hypnosis.
maybe I don't know. I don't know much about hypnosis. Um. Anyway, sorry, you were gonna say something, Trevor.
No,
Was that
go finish. But I
hypnosis?
just want to say something when you're done.
Oh no, I was gonna
No.
say. I was just gonna say, yeah, like
Yeah.
he's trying to literally like pull you apart from like your old way of thinking, and then reread kind of his ideas in a way like where it's intentionally difficult, but you do that so that you don't bias yourself while you're reading him. So it's been insightful but extremely difficult to read. But yeah, I think to Stephen's point, it's like, so for Heidegger, like the material world exists, but we're not. But human beings aren't just objective objects. There's a subjectivity, like a thrownness into history. We're fallen into history, and all that is like part of what it means to be human. And then after that, we then encounter like the objects, the physical world. And so I see Jordan doing that. I think you're right. Like his metaphysics is something like it's not quite materialism, like Marx or Nietzsche. It's more like it's more Heideggerian, more like ontological human
I think
being.
it's
What does
closer.
that
It
mean?
might be closer to idealism, something like Hegel.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, idealism. That's a tough one because with idealism, you ultimately reject materialism, and Hegel
Mhm.
is like the ultimate idealist.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Stephen, do you think that he's really just like only giving lip service? Because like in the realm of Mormonism, you would say that like there is actual significance to the matter, so much so that God came and embodied himself.
Well, that's an interesting question actually, because I feel like the LDS position often gets interpreted as a form of materialism, but I don't think it's actually saying that. I think when we read it, like spirit is more refined matter. It's just making an equivalence. So you could say that matter is, or what we understand as our physical matter here is just more condensed or coarse spirit.
Yeah.
That's another way of saying the same thing.
I've talked about this before too. Sorry, do you want to interrupt if you want to finish your thought? But
No, go ahead.
I've talked about this too, that I personally, the way I like to think of that scripture of like all spirit is matter is really flip it on its head. It's all matter is spirit.
Right.
Because like when you, and it's actually physically true when you think about it, because like I'm not a physicist, so this, if some guy would probably pick this apart, but when you think about it, like Albert Einstein, he came up with this famous equation E equals mc squared, right? Which energy, to figure out how much energy something has, you take the mass and multiply it by the speed of light squared, right? That's what C. So what he's fundamentally saying is that all matter is made out of energy. And we know that energy can't be created or destroyed. So in that sense, like the elements are eternal. So like energy and spirit, there's some alignment there, right? So it's like, it's almost like matter is more condensed energy, right? Yeah. And I feel like this aligns really well too with what we learn in, I believe, I want to say it's D&C 93, maybe it's 88, but it talks about how spirit and matter, inseparably connected, receive a fullness of joy, right? And it's basically the opposite of dualism, that like one, spirit or matter, one is better than the other, but they're actually supposed to be integrated together, right? And that's like, you can compare that to the incarnation of Christ, right? And the resurrection.
Yeah.
And it relates back to what Jordan Peterson talks about, where he talks about how there's the objective world and the meaning world, right? And the spiritual world is kind of like the world of meaning, right? And so the idea is marrying those two things. And he talks about how when those intersect, miracles happen. And so I remember there's this video where he's with Jonathan Pago, and he talks about how he's like, I'm amazed that I believe in Christ. Have you seen that one where he talks about how sometimes the narrative world and the objective world intersect, and that's when like miracles happen? And he's like, and that's why I actually believe in Christ, but I'm amazed that I believe that as this skeptical scientist kind of thing. Yes. You know what I mean? And so anyway, I think there's a lot of overlap there between what he's saying and what's taught within Mormonism,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of committed to monism, like the idea, like as opposed to dualism. We're committed to it that it's one thing, but then the question is whether that one thing is material fundamentally, or on the flip side, if it's, I think if we say spirit, then suddenly it becomes very strong that spirit, is often equated with intelligence in Mormon thinking. So if it's intelligence, that kind of suggests fundamentally mind. So I feel like there's a case for Mormon idealism.
Yeah, I kind of thought about it more in the transhumanist perspective, where they're looking at like de-aging, and they're looking at Don would know more about this, like nootropics are ways to stimulate the brain where they can
in that association, it's like the Mormon Transhumanist Association.
Yeah.
I've been in that group. Yeah.
One time I got into I didn't know that Carl Youngblood was in the transhumanist.
Okay.
That's all. I'll just step back from here.
Yeah, there's crazy. Yeah.
There's some interesting personalities, but like this idea that okay, if we look at the plan of salvation, at the beginning, we were spirits, and then we came here to become embodied, and then this idea that we're going to go somewhere else, if we play with that idea of does that mean literally somewhere else, or does that mean our spirits transform into something as we're embodied? Or, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to think about it, especially if you play with like what Trevor was saying about resurrection. Like, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that the body, like the cells in the body become, like the biological age and chronological age are different because of how we're treating our bodies with respect and being healthy? And you see this in other religions. I mean, if you look at like Hinduism and yoga, I mean, that stuff is like transformative. I mean, you look at like the Buddha and how he ended up eating like a grain of rice and meditating all day. All of those are like really intense embodiment practices. Jesus Christ, for 40 days, he was starving and he was having these, you know, visions and hallucinations. And, you know, we're in the time of Lent currently. 40 days, so I think we're 30 days, 29 days at this point. And most of the Christian world at this time is actually like, this period is the period of like putting forth your sins and like asking God, pleading for God to forgive you. Well, the sins, a lot of that has to do with embodiment. And so I was at Catholic Mass yesterday, and it was really interesting because the prayers had to do with embodiment. She was saying, the woman was saying, God, I plead with you, and we plead with you to help Uganda, to help Sudan, to help the children who will not be fed tonight, to help the incarcerated, to help those that are suffering, all embodiment. And so like, yeah, that idea, it's so complex with the spirit and the body.
Yeah, I haven't. I've talked to several people about like what Mormon metaphysics are. Right? It's either, are we dualists, or are we materialists, or are we like idealists? Or is there something, right? Is there a monad or something? It's super tough. I haven't reached any conclusions, but I'm sort of swayed by like the material. Like, I think that Mormonism places such a strong emphasis on being embodied, that there has to be something about material itself that like that has a privileged position in our system of belief. I don't know though. But, okay.
That's what I thought, that we were philosophically materialists. That's what I thought.
The doctrine is that those with a body are more powerful than those without a body.
Well, that
Right.
God is
Yeah,
that is
God
God
is
is having the
embodied,
body.
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what is a body?
And the glory of God is intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well, like the physical material body, like whatever body we embody right now is the body that ends up giving us more power than those
We've
without.
now, I think, like 15 minutes ago, we've officially entered like Midnight Mormons territory.
We're not drinking though. We're not getting that embodied.
Fun though. No, but Stephen touched on a point there. It's like, what is a body, right? You know, because that could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah. The way I visualize it now is, instead of like, you know, the hand in the glove, I now think of it more like liquid as being like the spirit world, and then if you want to enter, you can form it into ice, something like that. That's the material world. It's more of a phase transformation than coming into something separate.
Stephen, what you said reminds me, so the Swedenborg Foundation has a video just like that, where they literally compare water to the spirit and a balloon to the form. And so like having the spirit be like this sort of like free-falling thing that does not exist in form until it interacts with like the resistive force of materialism, that's what gives it shape. And so you can't have one without the other. And so like the spirit would be the driving force and the material would be the encapsulating force, and the union of the two creates something that cannot exist without the other.
What's the Swedenborg?
Are we gonna? No. There is way too much rabbit hole. But my theory is that
I'll say this much. Carol Gibbons said in class that Swedenborg was a legit prophet. Like,
and people would so much say that in the early attacks against the church, Emanuel Swedenborg. The only reason I found out about him was because early church critics. Oh, so go on.
He's the mystic that Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith got a lot of ideas from him, right?
So that's what people say. I've looked into the history. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest that.
Wasn't he
Joseph
a generation before Joseph Smith?
He was. It's like a few decades before. And so everything like eternal marriage, the 3 levels of heaven, the
Oh.
spirit world, and all that stuff. And so
Okay.
Swedenborg had like volumes of this, and like a lot of Swedenborg's work map very similarly to Jordan Peterson's work. So it's
Oh.
just like you read
Whoa.
Swedenborg's like volumes,
Huh.
like Arcana Celestia and Secrets of Heaven, and you can find almost direct references in Peterson's work. That's why the two are
What?
so similar to me.
That's crazy.
I'm gonna ask Don. He has like the sources. He's probably gonna say some of it is. I don't know. Let me.
Yeah, Swedenborg. I haven't read much, but from what I've heard, it's pretty cool stuff.
I'm the resident Swedenborg
Yeah.
expert. I've read all of his books.
Oh,
Wow, that's
so
cool.
I was reading. So I'm writing a paper for my biology neurobehavior class, and I'm trying to write a paper on the hard problem of consciousness. And so, in a nutshell, what the hard problem of consciousness is, cognitive scientists and neuroscientists have they've made a lot of headway in explaining how our biological systems process information, right? Like how our eyes process light and turn it into chemical signals, but they don't really understand how all that gives rise to experience as such, like your personal awareness. So it's like the best example is like your iPhone. Like your iPhone takes light information, audio information, and then metadata, and then it binds it all together into like a photo or a video. But the iPhone itself isn't conscious. Like it's not aware. It's not like an entity that's aware. But humans are, and they're doing all those things. So why, right? And there's no scientific explanation for why any of our biological processes give rise to our conscious experience. And so there's a big debate. So I'm reading a bunch of literature on this, and one guy said he's like, well, it's a tough problem, but we can already make a few logical moves. And he says maybe consciousness itself is like a fundamental aspect of the universe, like gravity and electromagnetism. Like gravity can't be subdivided into smaller parts. It's just part of the universe as a thing, And so maybe consciousness, our awareness, is just woven into the fabric of the universe, and it can't be broken into smaller pieces. And so,
would you say that consciousness is not emergent then, like an emergent?
Yeah.
phenomenon?
So he would say
Okay.
consciousness is not emergent because, and he gives a few examples, right? Because the emergent argument is well, if you have enough neurological complexity, it gives rise to consciousness. But the problem with that argument is people who have half their brains missing are still conscious, or if people suffer a lot of neural damage, they're still conscious. And then also your gut biome, it has a bunch of neuro complexity, but it is not conscious. So consciousness is not. Some people would say consciousness is just emergent, right? And they would say no, we have too many counter examples, so it's not emergent, and so it's actually just ontologically part of human being, and it's a fundamental aspect of the universe or something.
How does that work with sleep though? Because even when you sleep, you're not conscious, right? Or at least it's
Well,
a different form of consciousness.
Yeah, that's right. They would say it's a different form of consciousness because you're still dreaming and you're kind of self-aware in your dreams and you experience things.
This is the crossover with AI and large language models and the consciousness in there.
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah, again, yeah, I don't. I mean, the news buzz is oh yeah, AI is gonna be conscious, deep.
It's an Excel sheet. It's not conscious. That's where
exactly.
I definitely stand working with these things.
No, totally. Yeah. But
that's
that's the other argument though.
Hey, people really love their AI girlfriends.
Oh my gosh, I went to a thing with the Utah commissioner of AI, and he's huge problem in Utah is people getting AI girlfriends. Huge problem right now. I'm dang, that's
crazy.
That's sad. But
well, the AI, it finds out what you want to hear.
Oh my gosh,
it's,
it's
creepy.
Google released a personalized version where it has access to all of your search history. And so I've talked to it, and it knows intimate things, things like Google for health reasons. Oh shoot, that's weird.
That's scary.
That's funny.
That would be so embarrassing.
Hey, Corey had a question here, so we're getting.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We're doing Mormon style, right? Okay, so Corey said, go back to answering the question about the body. What is the body? What is a body, or what is body? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, within Mormonism, I think it's pretty straightforward, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's our physical bodies is the body, right? The Father has a body, flesh and bone, tangible as man, Son also.
Has to be born, right?
Yeah.
No, because Adam was a body and he was not born.
Okay, that's the question. Does a body have to be born?
Well, resurrection too. So
What?
Because one could argue if evolution was a thing, that the immediate species before Adam himself, Adam was born from a species before, but Adam was still born.
Right.
Man, the Adam and Eve story is so sexual. I just see it as a metaphor for sex. Just like, I mean,
Well, I love Swedenborg's
true,
interpretation. Yeah, because like Adam and Eve, whatever they are, obviously has to play into a definition of what is a body.
Say it again.
Like, what is a body has to be also taken back to Adam and Eve, because they are essentially, in Mormon theology, real people who are part of the human family, the progenitors of the human family. And so whatever we are in terms of a body, they also have to be, because Adam will eventually be resurrected.
I refuse to call my ape cousin an Adam or something. Like, it's just sex to me. Like, I don't know. I've taken too many evolutionary biology classes. I cannot wrap my mind around. Okay, the liver came from the earth.
Yeah.
Well, Brigham Young hated that too, right? He said it's a
True.
child story.
What?
Wait, what?
I actually
it's
thought
what
that the church was pretty pro-evolution at this point.
Well, in the 50s they weren't.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything about evolution. I just said Brigham Young himself hated the idea of the story of that it came from the dust or from the dirt.
Oh.
He said, like, the idea that a body came built like an adobe. He said that's a child's story.
Well, yeah, he thought they came from another planet, though, right?
He's like a man's story is men going to different planets
I
where
know,
the planets have the women, and every planet has their culture.
Oh my gosh! Every time
Yeah, so
someone
that's another
like
one.
quotes Brigham Young, I'm like,
Asian planet, Mexican planet.
Here. Like, ew, I don't know.
Well, I would love to just hang out with Brigham Young in the next life. Just like put me and Brigham Young in the same room. I just want to hear what
I will
he's
put
gonna
you
say.
two in a cage for sure.
No, I don't know. Maybe if I was a white guy who had that type of libido, I'd feel more comfortable hanging out with him. But I don't know if
I'm
if
Hispanic.
I was a brown guy or if I was a woman, I would not want to hang out with Brigham Young.
That's Jared's bag of chips right there. No, I'm just kidding.
I did have a dream where I saw Brigham Young and Joseph Smith one time, so I feel kinship with him.
That was your first vision. Just
With
kidding.
Joseph Smith or Brigham Young?
Both.
Both.
Oh.
Both.
That's interesting. Steven, you were gonna say something.
I was just going to add one other point on the body question, because I think really it's the same question as what is matter. And Trevor, you were mentioning the Einstein equation, right? The energy and mass are the same. So sometimes when physicists will talk about matter, what they'll say is that matter is frozen light, is one way to think about it.
Oh, it's interesting.
And so that's what's really interesting, right? When you go down to the depth, right? We've gone down to atoms, we've gone down to particles, right? Electrons, protons, we get down to quarks. But when you break all those down, the fundamental reality, in our best understanding, comes down to quantum fields now, like quantum field theory. I don't know if you're familiar with quantum field theory, but everything is ultimately like quantum fields, right, where energy can manifest as waves. So the further you go down, like that, I think Jordan Peterson is actually onto something. The less it starts looking like objects, and the more it starts looking like relationship action, as opposed to something you can grasp.
Like a process, right? Like a thing exists only when it's doing something.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's true.
Like if you have absolute zero, it's almost like it doesn't exist.
So I think that's literally why Jordan Peterson is calling it the forum of action, or the world of action. And
that makes sense. That's interesting. Yeah, that's like a form of idealism. I want to circle back to this comment from Corey. He says there's an idea in Christianity about angels having liminal bodies. Also, how is the church Christ body? Is that just metaphorical? Right?
Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
That's an idea. That's heavily within Catholicism and Orthodoxies. The church is Christ's body, right? And that or the bride of the bride of Christ, right?
Mhm.
I don't see why it wouldn't apply to Latter-day Saint theology either. So,
Oh, sorry, go on.
right?
That gets into
So
Christ consciousness, yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
so
that's kinda
this is
cool, yeah.
interesting because you have both the church is Christ's body and the church is also Christ's bride. One interpretation that I've heard of the Adam and Eve story as a metaphor is that Adam is the spirit and Eve is the flesh. So like when we
Distinguish
take
Swedenborg?
Adam and Eve as
Oh.
a metaphor for
Swedenborg?
ourselves, it's the relationship
What did-
between
what
Adam
did
being
you get
our
with
spirit
with
and Eve
Swedenborg?
being our flesh.
What did you
So
get from
it's
Swedenborg?
interesting that there is a
Interesting.
connection between Christ's body and also Christ's bride, because then you can see the interplay between the
Well,
spirit and the flesh.
that gets into like some theology too, where
I actually think
um,
counter this more.
like the idea is like that. I don't know if this is orthodoxy or where you hear this, but the idea that like like within the Trinity, it's like you have like the Father, and that's like just it's kind of more like almost panentheism, right? Where it's just like it's just
Yeah,
the spirit
panentheism.
essence
Yeah.
that fills the immensity of space, and that's the Father. But then like the Son is the embodiment of the Father, right, in human form, and that's is synonymous with Christ, right? And that you could also talk about Christ in terms of the Logos, which in John 1, the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and then the Word became flesh, right, and dwelt among us. So that's kind of parallels the idea of the Father and the Son. And that relates to what you're talking about with Adam and Eve. I don't know.
So
I
like
was
the
looking
Father
at
is the spirit. Oh yeah, go on.
This
cool.
thing seems like relevant. Is that what we're
Yeah, that's
Alejandro
awesome.
like
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's
so
the world
cool.
of action. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so
We should
Peterson
get
has
Corey
like
on here. He has some great comments. Can we drop him a link?
Corey, yeah, if you want to DM me, I'll send you the link to the chat.
The bride's body is the husband's body, and the husband's body is the bride's body.
Just real quick on that graphic, just to because they explain that very thing in the introduction, and I think it's relevant to the conversation. So Jordan thinks there's 3 great archetypes of the world of action, and that's the great mother, the great father, and the archetypical son. So the great mother would be nature, and eventually he doesn't say it there, but it relates it to chaos. So it's both creative and destructive.
Mhm.
The great father is what he emphasizes as culture, which I
As
think
order.
later he'll put it as order, right? We inherit those, and then the archetypical son is the one that is able to bridge the gap between both the creativity, chaos, and order, culture, and that's where meaning is found is within the son, bridging the gap between the two.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
that map, and you'll notice that there's positive and negative signs on there. And so like one of the mistakes that people make is they'll say like, oh well, order is only masculine and chaos and unknown is only feminine and it's only negative, and it's like no. That's both of these things, like um
Like yin and yang. There's a bit
yeah,
of each
exactly.
in
It's
each
like yin and
arc.
yang, right?
Yeah.
It's like chaos and the unknown and nature like is both gives rise to life, but it also is like cancer and natural disaster and and all that. So it's both. And I think he relates it to all sorts of different female deities, right? So he does like a comparative thing. But yeah, I love that. That's amazing.
That's really badass. I mean, I've always thought like, okay, so Christ, he atones, he dies, forgive them, they know not what they do. He goes up to heaven, and like this one time I kind of had like it's like a pseudo vision where I saw him go to the mother, and I saw the mother hold him, and the pain and the suffering he had from the world was just transmuted. 'Cause
Awesome.
like with death, does death actually negate pain and suffering? Because it doesn't seem like it does to me, but like transmutation does. It just kind of makes it net neutral. And so like this kind of made sense with that, with like the son going up to the mother and then the mother just transmuting it. So it's
Well-
not being passed on. It's like it seems like we have this whole like let's pass our suffering and then it ends up at Christ, and then what does Christ do with it? you know. So
I've always visualized death as a sort of divorce because you're divorcing the spirit and the relationship the spirit has to the body, and so like yeah, there is a stopping of pain because you're no longer in intimate union with the suffering body. But then when you come back, you know, it's healed, and so maybe I don't know. Obviously, there's
yeah.
I don't know where is the doctrine or in this, but it would make sense that your spirit would need healing because there is a separation from a relationship, like a very deep intimate relationship. And the
Yeah.
spirit world has to heal the spirit once it dies.
It's got to be something like that because like okay, it's like after you suffer, even if you're no longer suffering, you still need like sustenance or something, you know. And so like I've always thought that like Christ go, and this is not like gospel anything, this is Jasmine's vision, you know. And this is not, but like I just think that Christ probably went back up to the mother and the mother gave him sustenance, and maybe she didn't take the suffering, but maybe she just gave him that sustenance, that grounding, and then I don't know. That's what seems like it works with me. And it also like kind of goes with this graphic, but I'm not a prophet.
Yes, you are. You are, Jasmine. Your prophetess.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta go because I have a bunch of stuff, but I can leave the live stream going. You guys can keep like, you guys can keep going. Actually,
Yeah,
you know what?
go ahead.
Or maybe I'll just do my homework live.
There you go.
We'll all help you. 4 collective brain cells.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna give one more thought as it relates to the embodiment, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll let you go, Alejandro. Sorry, just stick with me for 1 minute
No
here. I think this relates back to if we're talking about like what Stephen was saying, where it's like, okay, we have like this fundamental spiritual essence that is the world of meaning and the world of action, right? And then, you know, I talked about how I did a post earlier this week about like the second coming of Christ and how, you know, one interpretation of it is actually the manifestation of Christ in the real world. So it's like, you know, heaven, it's like, it's in the Lord's Prayer. When you think about it, we only have one prayer from Jesus that I'm aware of. Well, we have Garden of Gethsemane too. Off the top of my head, I can only think of those two. Is the Lord's Prayer and him praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. Maybe there's more.
There's, I think, at least one more where he gives I think it's like the Apostles' Prayer.
Oh, that's true. He prays
Yeah.
for his apostles.
But that was right before Gethsemane, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually another significant one too, but that's for another day. But anyway, we only have a few prayers. Sorry about that. We only have a few prayers to the Lord, and one of them is the Lord's Prayer when he says, bringing, you know, as earth, on earth as it is in heaven, right? And so, like, maybe one way of looking at embodying thing is, okay, how do we align ourselves with the world of meaning and the world of action so that we can embody it in our actions and manifest it in the real world, so we're aligning heaven with earth?
That's what Don said that Joseph Smith got from Swedenborg is the alignment and the heaven and earth.
That's cool.
Yeah. Do you think that's accurate?
I would love to see any evidence that Joseph Smith had any understanding of Swedenborg besides the one quote that I've read online somewhere.
Oh,
because
okay.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's what Don said. 'Cause I don't.
One of the things about Joseph Smith that's so cool is how he's able to synthesize different sources. Like let's say you assume that Joseph Smith kind of like, you know, if you want to put it uncharitably, that he ripped off like all sorts of stuff from all sorts of other traditions.
He's a creative ripper, okay?
Yeah, I would say even if that's the case, he's like the most masterful synthesizer ever, right? Because he's just like reinventing all these traditions and incorporating all this information, and so masterfully done. I'm just like, this guy is like an artistic genius, you know?
Yes.
Wouldn't Occam's razor just make it more simple that like, hey, everyone saw the light on the other side, had experiences with God over centuries, and Joseph Smith also had an experience with God?
I don't know. Occam's razor is like, I feel like it's such a Reddit like skeptoid, like, oh, Occam's razor, but because like the simplest explanation doesn't necessarily mean it's a good one. It just means it just means like you should exhaust the simplest one before you move on to more complex ones. And so like if you study like physics, like those are just complicated ideas and theorems and stuff. And if you just want to resort to simplicity, like it's relatively like, I mean, physicists and mathematicians do try to strive for simplicity, but their simplicity is still way complicated.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So Joe Smith is like this master synthesizer, and so like if it's the case that he borrowed something from Swedenborg, it's like I have no problem with that. Like
I agree.
it's just amazing what he's able to do.
Well, it's like
Um,
Freemasonry too, right?
yeah, exactly.
That I was gonna bring up the endowment, and like I
Yeah.
think me and Trevor were
The
talking about the
endowment,
John
definitely.
Bennett and the 3 degrees and all of that. Like that, it's all he intertwined everything. I mean, the man was a freaking genius, like, and a
Yeah.
spiritual genius. Like,
That is
Seriously.
one thing that that I actually love about Mormonism, and unfortunately, culturally, we've kind of moved away from this.
Yes.
But I love, like, one of my favorite quotes of Joseph Smith. There's a few of them that I love, but one of them was like that, like, um, you know, I'll have to find it and maybe I'll post it. But it's basically like, hey, we're gonna gather all the truth from wherever it may come, and we're gonna we're gonna tie it together. And it's like it's
let
regardless.
truth come from where it may. Yeah. And in fact, he requires Mormons to be full Mormons to gather truth from where it may and bring it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that brings up the topic of meta religion. Like, is Mormonism can Mormonism be a meta religion? And according to Joseph Smith, that is the philosophy statement.
Yo, that's such a good question. I think we're heading in that direction. See,
Man, it's
remember-
part of it's the core of the restoration.
I
mean,
remember watching Heretic, right? In the who's the actor, the evil guy.
What's his name?
Yeah, he started talking about like
Grant.
Hugh Grant. He goes through like a comparative religion thing, and I'm like, oh, but that doesn't really work for Mormonism because it's
Yeah, I
so
agree.
eclectic already. But so I thought that was
Oh
an
yeah,
interesting
you can
part of
find
the-
like almost every religion in Mormonism. It's true.
Yeah,
Well,
what
so-
would you
and this
need
was-
for meta religion to be like a thing? Because you could say with the universal salvation theory of Mormonism, it already is. But like, what
Yeah.
are the qualities of a meta religion?
Well,
yeah, it takes a little bit of critical thinking because if you think of like gods, right? Like if Mormons really think that they have the only true God, then everybody else's God that they're worshiping is the Mormon God. They just are calling it a different name. So is it cultural and ethnic lack of education? Or is it that we actually have to be competitive about religion? Because to me, it seems like it's more like lack of cultural education, right? Like I think we're all praying to the same God. We're just calling it different names. And so then that highlights like why are we trying to be competitive if there's a grain of truth everywhere? We just need to gather it like Joseph Smith said. And Joseph Smith is the founder. That's what he said. So I'm not Joseph, and that's what he said. That's the authority.
I've had this same thought before, and like the only reason like I've kind of like come like my personal come to peace with this idea is that like there are people that want it to be competitive, like everyone be part of the religion, but what I'm starting to understand now is that the church exists specifically for gathering into the covenant, which is gathering into the house of Israel, which is like the celestial kingdom and the family of God and the priesthood and all that stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
But the meta religion is like universal salvation for everyone outside of that as well.
Ok, Jared, pero si hablo español contigo, sí me puedes entender porque estás entendiendo un idioma. Pero son idiomas diferentes, pero son la misma, son idiomas. Así que me puedes entender, aunque no es inglés.
Yeah, that's why the covenant is like universal. Like it's not tied to like a culture or a language, unless you're saying
Stephen and
covenant is
Trevor,
culture.
what I said is like, so if I'm speaking to you in Spanish, you're understanding a language. So that's like I'm making it synonymous with God. If like some Buddhist person or some Hindu person is praying to God, then it's still the same. And I pray to God. It's the same God, even though they call it Krishna or whatever. But we're still understanding it's still functioning the same. The function is the same. And so bringing it back to maps of meaning, like that's meaningful. It's meaningful for Indian people to pray to this God, just like it's meaningful for me to pray to the Heavenly Father. So the meaning is still the same, even though they're different languages. So when we become competitive about religion, does it have to do with like whiteness, not understanding, and not whiteness? I'm using race because that's the easiest thing, but like
Culture.
Yeah.
or religious superiority. Like,
Yeah.
are we being religiously superior to other people when we're all praying to the same God?
In what action,
Yeah,
though?
that's a
By
great
saying
question.
that this is like the true church, or like what action makes us religious? Because I would.
Well,
and
so
I say
if it's a meta religion, it is the true church, no matter how you come at it.
I think
Yeah.
that's where I may have
Yeah.
a disagreement that that Mormonism necessarily cannot be a meta religion because the covenant that it espouses as an organization, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, has restrictions on that. So like
Yeah,
the
that,
theology of Mormonism could be meta religion, but like
Sure,
the
but
church
that's the
organization.
restrictions. That's not the philosophy. Like
well,
the
I
restrictions, I
literally
absolutely agree with.
I literally asked ChatGPT this like a few while ago because I was like because meta modernism is like a new emerging philosophy.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, meta modernism sounds like a cool term. What would that look like? And so I was like bouncing ideas off chat, and like, but it brought up that same criticism. It's like Mormonism, at least some people would say Mormonism is a unique religion that has certain features, but if it becomes too meta, then it erases its uniqueness. And so like, so
Yeah.
I don't know
So
exactly.
that's interesting because like there has to be tension, right? And so okay, so for religions to keep members, they tend to be more conservative because people like regulation. This is like this is psychology.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, and so that there has to be tension. And so how can it be meta and keep tension? And so that is a good critique of
I
meta
I
think
have a,
religion.
Patrick
Yeah.
I have
Mason
a potential
gave a.
solution that maybe you can go first, but
Oh
I'll
no, you go
I'll
ahead.
say
Go ahead.
it.
And then I gotta go.
Yeah, you gotta let Alejandro go. Sorry, dude.
No, you're cool.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll leave the chat open though. Like I'll leave after Steven's comment, but I'll leave the live stream open. You guys can, just say whatever.
okay. Yeah, I won't go into too much depth. It's a longer thought. But um, I think there's a case to be made that in the restoration there was a restoration of three churches, and I think I can go down that rabbit hole and show that scripturally those each have names. And so you can think of it in terms of like the kingdom of heaven in the afterlife. We already know that it's the kingdom of God, but in the kingdom of God, there are many mansions. And that is interpreted as many degrees, right? Or sections within that kingdom. And I would say that the fullness of the kingdom of God on earth should be in parallel and like with the heavenly as on earth. And so I think the restoration was intended to establish these three large gradations, and I think there are actually three churches. And so one way to kind of reconcile this meta religion is to say that, everybody has their own language and has these truths, but there's something that's up more if you can think of it as concentric circles that has, can see like the blind man on the elephant sees all the different parts, but then there's one language that can tie into the truth of them all and give all of them credence, and they're all part of the kingdom of God, but not necessarily that all of them have the fullness of the concentric circles to live the highest of laws. They're all part of one God's kingdom,
Yeah.
but there are, further steps that we uniquely own, if you want to put it
It's
that way.
like the second coming philosophy of like there's like the king, like there's a kingdom, right? In the second coming, many different religions, everyone living in peace or whatever. But then
Yeah.
that
There's
makes a lot of
ultimately
sense.
some organization to it, so it's not just like everybody doing their own thing, but there actually is a bridge.
In deference, so like the people at lower level defer to higher and higher levels
They
up
can at least
until
connect.
Jesus
They might
Christ.
disagree who's higher or who's lower, but I think they have a common language that they agree this is true, and so they're in an organized collective system. Even if
Yeah.
Okay, so the disagreement on who is closer to Jesus probably is a point of interesting discussion there.
yeah.
Yeah, that is see, that is tough. Okay, so I'll say this. So in Maps of Meaning, he does comparative religion, right? He'll go through like an Egyptian myth, a Mesopotamian myth, Jesus, and then the Buddha. So that kind of
Yeah.
covers like a lot of ground. And he tries to like find the similarity and like the underlying structure of all those stories, and I think he makes a pretty good case, and so he is sort of kind of going into this meta religion, comparative religion territory, where he's saying something like even all these different religious traditions, at the bedrock is this like ontology about it is to be a human being, and what the human experience is like. um, I think you can find that in all religions. I think all religions say something about the human condition. But where it gets dicey is like it's. I think it's like I think Joseph Smith went to the like root of it. It's like who has the authority to do certain things, you know. And so it's like for us, it's like the LDS Church is the custodian right now of the temple and the priesthood, right? It could be the case that other religions. This is Patrick Mason's argument now. It's like it could be the case that other religions, like the Jews and the Catholics or whoever, right? They seem there's historical continuity with it with those groups and God's dealings with man. Um, but now the game has shifted and now we're in a new phase and now the Mormons are like in charge of a specific thing, and it's not necessarily that they're absolutely false because at one point they were probably true, but now we're playing a unique role in this latter day epoch or something like that. um but once you get into see the one of the as a missionary tool, the great apostasy became a powerful thing, right? Like a persuasive argument for joining the LDS Church was because there was an apostasy, and now priesthood um, priesthood authority has been restored. The church and like the Maxwell Institute, for example, is sort of like challenging that narrative that there was truly a
Yeah.
disconnect in authority. I think there's still a way to reconcile all that.
That's interesting.
The book
Even
Ancient
though,
Christianity.
huh?
Are you talking about the book Ancient Christianity? by
Yeah,
Marshall?
yeah, I have
Yep.
it right here.
I was
Ancient
trying to
Christian.
find it.
Who wrote that?
There was
It was like
I
a
don't know myself
collection
somewhere.
of people.
there was
You can
some
get it.
section either in Doctrine and
Yeah.
Covenants or in the Pearl of Great Price that says there was always going to be someone with authority on the earth.
An introduction
it's-
for Latter-day Saints, but who wrote it?
I think
Yeah,
it's
that's
like it's edited, so there's like multiple authors.
Oh,
Everyone takes a
It's a
chapter.
great book.
This
I
is
haven't read
heavy
the whole
too,
thing,
right?
but
I think one thing that's important too is in the Doctrine and Covenants, it makes it a point that the church wasn't lost from the earth, which is interesting, right? The woman
Oh, it went into the wilderness,
into the
right?
wilderness, right? And she
And
needs-
that maps with Jordan's thing
Mm.
too.
yeah.
Because
Where
at
it goes
least you
into the
have like
margin.
Peter, James, and John the Baptist.
Okay.
Like there were people with authority always on the earth.
I'm outie, guys. Keep talking.
right.
Well,
See
thank you,
y'all.
guys.
Bye-bye.
I'll see you later.
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Now
So
we
Stephen,
can
I
talk
really
about
wanted to get.
anything that we want. Now he's gone.
I know, right? Stephen, I really wanted to see, and this might be going back to Jasmine's thing about meta religion.
Yeah,
Doesn't meta religion need people to all agree as to the difference level? Because, like, if there is concentric circles, right? Ultimately, what it seems in the second coming and after all this is that Christ is every knee shall bow before Christ. Christ is ultimately what everyone gives deference to. Christ is the meta religion, right? And whatever Christ says, hey, these are my servants, or whatever, that creates a gradation. But before we get to that point where people agree on who actually serves Christ, like, is there not a meta religion? Or is meta religion just a philosophy?
I think it's more of a I think it's more of a philosophy because there has to be order, right? Like if you look at okay, so this is going to be like my hippie, but if you look at like the mandala, the outward spirals are totally chaotic. And as you go inward and inward and inward, it becomes more and more symmetrical and more geometric. It makes mathematical sense till you hit the center of awareness, where it's just kind of like an eye looking back at you, just pure awareness, right? And so there has to be, and Corey pointed this out in the chat, which I really like there has to be an order to it. So a meta religion is not all religions are equal, I don't think. I think a meta religion is like all religions have similarities and they serve a function for different people. Can we grab those similarities and put them under a line of authority to where it's functional? I don't know. That's kind of my best stab at it.
So
What do you think?
I like Swedenborg's description of heaven as a human body, where the heart is compared to like the third heaven, and the heart kind of like sends out all of its everything to all the different parts of the body. But the hand is not necessarily in deference to the heart. The hand is receiving all the blood and energy and direction from the head. But it's, I would assume in that instance, maybe it's not deference, but everything receives life and guidance from the same source.
Well, we see this in biology that like biodiversity actually holds everything stable. And when you start knocking off, certain, species or whatever, then that balance is undone and then everything's chaotic because they're not able to fight certain diseases or whatnot. And so there has to be order. Meta religion, I don't think is like everyone's equal, like
Yeah.
Right.
but I think like the function can be pulled from different religions in a non-competitive way where we're actually like illuminating and helping and seeing the beauty in everything, like truth, beauty, and goodness. Like instead of focusing just on truth, there's like beauty and goodness that can be pulled into truth. Maybe. I don't know.
And I'm going to make a Book of Mormon case for the largest concentric circle, which is that there in the last days, right, there are saved but two churches only, the Church of the Lamb and the Church of the Devil. And I think it's a really, really huge mistake if people are looking at it and saying that the Church of the Lamb is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like, because the Book of Mormon makes
Really?
it very explicit that
Doctrine and Covenants too.
yeah, and I was going to say anything like Moroni, anything that does good comes from God, right? It comes from a good tree, right? So I think under the Book of Mormon's own doctrine, anything that is producing good fruit in the world is part of that church of truth, if
Right.
you want to put it that way. And
It's more of like
things
a
that are working
metaphysical
against
yeah.
truth.
church, like a
Yeah.
So it's almost church a little bit in the way that Protestants think of church.
right.
Like there's this collection of serving God that brings us into kind of united. So I
Well, this is sorry. Corey had another comment. I'm just going to comment that because it relates to this. He says, "I think the great apostasy idea is true to an extent, but it needs a lot of notation. What you guys are talking about when you say the church went into the wilderness is the Protestant idea of the invisible church, the only good Protestant idea in his opinion." So
Yeah.
I think it's like you're talking about the invisible church, right? Where
yeah,
it's like it's the ideal
Right.
that we're shooting towards, and it makes sense when you think about it like that way, because it's like church of the the first or whatever church
Church of the Lamb.
Church of the Lamb and then Church of the Devil. It's like, I mean, everything when you think about it, everything works on a continuum, right? So it's like there's on this side there's the Church of the Devil and the Church of the Lamb, right? So there's a million things in between that continuum, but you can only go one of two directions.
So Trevor, when you said Church of the Firstborn, I'm thinking of Fred Collier.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking, okay, take historical documents and like, perpetual polygamy, and he has a lot of children.
Yeah, because
Yeah, he would
in
think
the
that
Doctrine
too.
and Covenants, I thought I may be mistaken. Church of the Firstborn is tied to the Celestial Kingdom, while
Celestial,
Church of the Lamb is it because like in Doctrine and Covenants 1820, I posted in the chat. It's like the Lord says, "Contend against no church, save it be the church of the devil." So he at least pointed out that like Christianity, going back to what we've been talking about, is good, is of the Lamb. The good people out there don't contend against them. There's the
Yeah.
philosophy of Satan. That's the thing that needs to be contended
Yeah, but again, I would
against.
say I would argue it's a continuum, right? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, so it's a continuum and not a slice?
I wouldn't say it's
That's
just the Church
interesting.
of the Christ or Church of I would say it's a continuum, because there's gonna be certain things in everything that's good that gets you towards the Church of the Lamb, and there's certain things that are bad. So there's no one that's like in the ideal world, because we live in a
Yeah.
materialistic, imperfect world, right?
Yeah.
And we're all
That's
imperfect ourselves,
interesting.
but it's a continuum. Like, so every church would align something on that continuum.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I'm in a lot of conversations regarding polygamy, and a lot of people are thinking about like the fruits of polygamy, right? And so that reminds me of what you're saying of like and the fruits of polygamy, right? It's underneath certain like a little bubble, right? They're not looking they like people refuse to look at polyamory research or polygyny that's non-religious, and so they're looking at like a very small subset of people when they're saying the fruits of polygamy. But that's interesting with the Church of the Lamb versus the Church of Satan, and looking at fruits that, as their fruits ye shall know them. Yeah.
So are you inclined to fruits are good, bad? I'm just curious what your
That's a good
what your experience is, because I don't have that same context.
Oh, well, like from an academic perspective, like if you're looking at like a whole subset, so not just religious polygamy, there's like polyamorous polygamy, or there's even polygynous non like secular polygynous where there's like one man and like women who are attached to each other and the man, so it's more equal, like non-patriarchal polygyny. And research on those children are really interesting because they are different. I mean, I've seen perfectly functional, like religious polygamist families who have very highly achieving kids, like extremely, and they're very emotionally and healthy and they're very intellectual. Right. So it's, I think that, I mean, okay, so people who are very anti-polygamist, polygamists don't want to be friends with them, right? And so they don't oftentimes see the whole spectrum. They only see the FLDS. So that's kind of a problem with data. So if we look at the full spectrum of data, we get a clearer picture on what lifestyles and what, like, if lifestyles are healthy or dysfunctional, not just like a small subset. So when people take any hard line on anything, they kind of alienate the ability to have like anthropologists, right? If they go into like South Africa and they're like, oh, these people are nude, that's disgusting, you know, put some clothes on. The people aren't going to actually want them in the tribes. They're not going to be able to understand like why they're nude because it's fucking tropical, you know, or whatever. You know, they're not going to be able to understand like the food, the customs, the religion. They're really missing a whole data set. So I'll say that, you know. So
like,
but my understanding comes from an academic perspective rather than a religious one. So I'll also put that caveat.
well, it's well, because the church is trying to be global, right? They do try to make concessions to take in the good from other cultures, and it comes like the high EQ cross-cultural globalist idea of like,
Yeah.
you got to kind of put your priors aside and show curiosity to the different culture. Like, I think that's what you're saying, right? Like, if you don't spend time to like get to know like the culture and understand like what is the positives that are coming from them, and kind of like put like assumptions aside, like you will have a hard time.
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes into the ethics of anthropology. Like in anthropology, when we're looking at ethics, anthropologists, they can go into a culture and they can start judging. And so in anthropology, in it, like the intro class of anthropology, they teach something called the Great Chain of Superiority. And this is the concept that early anthropologists in the 15, 16, and 1700s, they were usually white men from England, and they would go around the world and they would they would use their lenses to look at these tribes, and they would put assumptions on, oh, these people are savages because XYZ, right? And as anthropology has developed, there's a lot of really cool standards that have come to the forefront and Thomas Murphy, do you guys know who he is by any chance? He does Book of Mormon DNA studies. He's a white man, and he is so good at being able to like withhold judgment and look at other cultures as they are. And that's something that we're missing, I think, in the polygamy debate, is like kind of withholding judgment. And a part of it is like, I think probably like perpetual trauma. Like, for example, like with polyandry, like if you guys had consistent consumption of polyandry, you guys would probably start looking at your marriages and being like, you know, kind of like nervous, right? So this is what Mormon women are put under, is that they're consistently getting fed all of this information, and they oftentimes do not have the cognitive and emotional abilities to. So for example, Jared, we were talking about emotional deregulation. So in dialectic behavioral therapy, which is targeted towards emotional development, we look at how, like, if you're angry, how can you like calm your anger down so that it aligns with your values, so you don't like hit the car, like, you know, or
I've
if
been
you're
in it for a year, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I've done DBT 3 times. I loved it.
Yeah,
It's very spiritual.
The church's emotional resilience manual, which I'm also going through it, and my
Yes.
wife's doing that. Yeah, there's a lot of themes in that
Yeah.
as well.
So,
yeah.
so right. So with sadness or depression, like we learn how to not be depressed, right? And with other emotions, we learn how to regulate. So we're not going off the rails, right? So in our monogamous culture, we don't teach emotional regulation with jealousy, right? So if you have a goal, we don't really teach how to stay regulated to where people aren't, and so we have like generations of monogamous people who have not taught jealousy skills, which people need in monogamy too. Like they don't just need it in polygamy, they need it in monogamy. Like, and when they don't
I will
have
say
jealousy
on a
skills,
personal level, this is a live topic. So if you have anything that like can like help me with that, like I think, I'll
Yeah.
try to, I'll keep this as like respectful as possible, but I will
Yeah.
100% say that is true, and it is a difficult experiential thing to have to go through and navigate, and I can understand
Yeah.
why polyandry may seem to provoke some sort of like healthy communication in that, because that is probably a very powerful emotion that needs to be figured out early on in those kinds of relationship. But like in a monogamous relationship, I am somewhat learning through life experience that what is it that like a lot of times there's a lot of like assumptions in typical cultures in regards to like opposite gender friends, right? And so like trying to like navigate that, there's a lot of like not hearsay, but like passed down cultures like just don't have them, or like XYZ, but like having those honest communications, it's very difficult. But it would make sense why there might be a correlation between like those relationships where those conversations are happening because they're forced to happen, and positive effects.
Well, and in polyamory, like non-religious polygamy, they're not forced to happen, they're chosen. They choose to have the conversation. Hey, I feel insecure about XYZ. You were talking about polygamy.
In terms of like you are confronted with the problem and it needs to be resolved probably much sooner and to a much higher degree earlier. Not forced in the sense that like it's forced upon by a third party.
Right. Well, and one could make the argument that like in polygamy, religious polygamy, it is forced upon by a third party because of the religious, like people think they have to do it for religion or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that's why polyamory research is so interesting to me, because these are people who intentionally opt in. They like without force. Like they're saying like, why would I do this? How is this going to look for my kids to have like multiple parents in the house, for incomes, for my own personal well-being? And so this is where like I think that Mormon polygamist research is, they don't want to look at this. And I don't understand why. I think they want to make it all bad. Like they don't want to look at the secular research, which we do that with everything else. Like Alejandro,
I would challenge you on that. A lot of people don't like secular research.
Yeah, which is really weird because like Alejandro is a psychologist. That's all secular. Jordan Peterson is all secular, And so we're okay with being secular except with polygamy. We will not be secular with polygamy. Like, what's that about, So.
And I'll say from what I heard, it was some sort of early Mormon woman like was on record just saying like no, there is a power to the polygamous relationships that she's seen. Right now, one could argue per se that there is probably a difference between God approved and God sanctioned and like non-God approved. So one could make that argument, and I think that may be
right.
And I don't know where you're going with the secular or the academics, because there might be political priors. Well, no, I'm assuming that like if you have like a Mormon researcher, right, trying to study polygamy in the modern day from fundamentalists, like it goes back to the anthropological argument that you're talking about, where it's just like people have a hard time putting their priors aside.
Yeah, they do. They really do. Well, if you study like African polygamist women that have been doing this for generations and generations, they're like, man, we need our sister wives to raise our kids. Like my sister wife can talk to my kid about something that I can, and my other sister wife I can talk to her kid about things that I can't. And we don't want multiple men. We just want to be with this one man, right? So it has to do with like alpha dominance or like hypergamy, which is what Jordan Peterson talks a lot about. So this is the idea that like women vote in like a certain man and then attach themselves to a certain man and hopefully like collaborate with each other, among other things. Hypergamy is pretty extensive. But so like Mormon women, like why do Mormon polygamy researchers not study like polygamous women in other cultures? Like, what's that about? So there's a big data set that they're just not looking at. Like, they just want to make it all bad. And making it all bad is trauma bonding. It's not a healthy thing to do. And so, but that's coming from a academic perspective, not a religious one. Like, I've had a lot of conversations with religious people where they just want to talk about the religion. And so that's fine too. But I usually come at it from an academic place.
At the polygamy conference next week,
What was that?
is someone going to talk about what you're talking about?
No, it's academic, but it's historical academic,
Yeah,
specifically with Mormons. But I mean, watch. Nobody will be talking about other data sets except me. Like,
As a data scientist, data sets are very important. I will tell you
they
that.
are, because how can you draw a fair conclusion if you're using a small subset?
I will say that it depends on what your intentions are, right? Like what are people's intentions? And again, like with like, for example, like Mormon scholars and stuff like that, especially like BYU scholars, it's faith pushing, right? Like obviously you still have to like probably follow along with the academic principles to meet academic standards, but you're probably not going to get maybe more of like an anthropologically neutral view of that from like a faith-based school. But I don't know.
I've been really surprised by BYU. I mean, it's really interesting because, my husband Don does a lot of work for Scripture Central, and they currently are aligning with not saying that the Book of Mormon happened any specific place. The LDS Church is no longer saying, they said for 100+ years that it happened in South America, and then it was the Native American. Well, first it was the Native Americans, and then it was in Mexico, and so they've had these phases of where it's happened, but now they actually are withholding any location, and they're just actually in this last conference and the conference before, they were heavily talking about like the symbolic, right? That's fair. That's really fair, right? Because they're not putting anyone or any ethnic minority under either distress or like filio empowerment almost. They're just leaving it as it is.
Okay.
That's fair academic standards. Like,
would they
that's
still
fair.
claim that it's in the Americas? Because like
They haven't.
Okay, so that's the interesting thing. So you're saying
Well, they haven't
Central Center-
recently.
Okay, so
Yeah. So
because
the ones
that-
promoting that are like apologist organizations.
well, not America, like United States, like the Americas, like North, Central, South, because the Book of Mormon geography is that they left, and this entire continent is where the Book of Mormon potentially took place. No.
So
specific-
as of the last 5 to 10 years, they have not said any locations.
not even the American continents. Now that's interesting.
Nope.
But the Book of Mormon itself.
Hey guys, I gotta go.
Okay.
But good chatting with you. You guys keep talking, but we'll talk soon.
I probably got to go in about 5 minutes, but hey, thanks for being here, Trevor.
It was nice to meet you, Trevor. Take care.
Take care.
Do you guys have any closing statements or any burning questions or thoughts to anyone else?
The only other thing that I was going to mention that was in the kind of the previous conversation was I find it interesting historically that Joseph Smith never claimed exclusivity to Aaronic priesthood authority.
Oh, really?
Yes. So you see that with Melchizedek, he'll say we're the only ones that can.
Yeah,
lay
and the
hands
keys
on
and stuff like that.
most. The keys and like the further temple keys, those are all exclusive claims. But Aaronic level authority, he never actually made exclusive claims. So I thought that was
because there's the Levitical priesthood outside of the organized church. That probably the Jews have somewhere, right? Maybe he leaves room open for that.
Yeah, and so that's kind of comes to my mind visually, like when I think of the woman going into the wilderness, I think of like a telestial sphere, that third sphere, this third order of the priesthood, that perhaps I'm open. I'm not totally sold on one way, but I'm open to the idea that like the early Christians and the Christian faiths that have continued since the early traditions have kept some level of lower level authority potentially. I don't know.
What do you think of like multiple prophets existing at the same time?
Well,
We have that in scripture, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at least when they were separated, we know that existed. In the two different hemispheres. But I guess the question is, what is a prophet then? And I think you could broaden the scope of people who are asking questions and getting answers from God and able to share those to people. I think that's happening all over the world. So on that level, I think there are a lot of prophets that exist like throughout the world right now.
Yeah, because President Nelson is not simply just a prophet. Prophet, seer, revelator, holder of all the keys, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Like that. Is there, like, do we have an equivalent of that over the ages where there was only one person who held all the keys? Like, that almost seems like in the Old Testament we don't have an equivalent for. It was only equivalent after the 12 apostles was called by Jesus Christ himself. Unless we have like some sort of like Levitical order priesthood where there was like one person that held all the authority.
Yeah, the closest I can think of is like the idea that Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, and so
Something like that.
that Melchizedek was kind of like the head guy of the whole thing. So that's actually what Joseph Smith kind of points to when he restores this third order priesthood in Nauvoo. He lays out that Abraham's patriarchal authority was subservient to Melchizedek's higher fullness of authority. But that whole reframing of Nauvoo priesthood, I think, is lost as far as our discussions in the church today. So that's a whole other rabbit hole.
That's whenever I hear something's lost, I actually am like so pro restoration. It's actually, to me, it's actually like faith promoting when things are lost, because that means that like we're the ones, or like the future generations are the ones that can be open to bringing these ideas.
Yeah.
So the fact that you just said this, Stephen, like how many people are going to view this, how many people are going to actually have more thoughts on that. And so that's really faith promoting. Yeah.
Still many great and wonderful things yet to be revealed, right?
Right. Yes. Well, I got a dip, guys, but thanks so much.
Yeah, I think
it was nice.
We can probably all
meeting everyone.
There, right?
Have a good night, everyone.
Happy
Talk to you
Sunday.
next time.
Yeah,
Peace.
We'll see you.